The time is 2:16 p.m. on December 13th, 2023, and we will call the work group meeting to order. On behalf of Indian River, on the School District of Indian River County, we have Dr. Shafty, Dr. Jones, Dr. Moore, and Dr. Seymour, represented by Matt Carson. And from the NAACP, we have Mershawn Green, Kevin Browning, Tony Brown, Denise Smith, and myself. Okay, so I think we are on the agenda today. We are wrapping up the outstanding KPIs from section 6. I have from my notes, because the proposed KPIs for academic achievement and performance were tied to FSAs, which were the past performance standard, that we would be revising them to be inclusive of or accommodate for however the standards may change, or whatever the assessments may be. I don't know if you all have drafted that yet, or if we circle back on that.
I remember now that, we were going to, instead of having just general references, we were going to reference the specific assessments. I know we've talked about those since then, but we've not created that list, but we can certainly do that.
Okay,
for the
then
next meeting.
I think we have agreement as to those in terms of like the content of the indicator. It's just the names. Then correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are looking at then, are we looking at the proposed indicators for disciplining classroom management? Is that where we left off? Okay. And
You want to review, because we're just changing FSA to FAST, is that what you're referencing?
yes. And
But also the end of courses that are used where appropriate.
so I think we talked about you all making those changes and resubmitting them to us, just because we kind of agree on substance and just need the specific names
Okay, yeah,
to be.
we can do that and send that back. I mean, it's
Okay.
straightforward.
Okay. Great. And for discipline and classroom management, we left off at the last meeting with kind of open questions is the best way to measure it. And the NAACP has discussed on the back end what we would propose. And what we would propose would be that we use risk ratios for each disciplinary category, similar to how classroom removals are measured. We would apply that same measurement to Aspire, out-of-school suspensions, and LTOS.
I don't think we have any issues with that, right? I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have a caveat now with, right now, I am just looking at LTOS, Aspire, out-of-school suspensions, office discipline referrals. We now would propose risk ratios specifically to the discipline categories wherein the district makes the actual decision. We had included, like indicator 8, for example, relates to student arrests, and we now understand that the district does not make arrests. So we are, I think, really just looking at, but we would kind of come up with a replacement, basically, of how we would measure what the school district does control, calling the police, that sort of thing. But just for these, but we need to discuss that. But for risk ratios, as what we emailed you yesterday, I think here it would be, just looking, it would be indicator 10, 11, 12, 13. And we would want to have a discussion for indicators 8 and 9.
Would it benefit if I just talk through the structure in terms of a school resource or a deputy
Yes.
on campus? So all schools on our campus have a deputy, which is a joint decision from our school board as well as the sheriff's office. It is co-funded, equal split to make sure that we have an officer. We are required to have either an officer, I say officer because I'm from Miami, or someone who's gone through a guardian training. We make the decision to have a real live deputy on campus. In terms of arrest, there's the code of conduct in which we enforce, which are for behaviors that take place. And then when there's criminal activity, if it is observed or seen, whether it's on campus or off by the officer, it's not really, oh, we're going to enforce the code of conduct if you broke the law. And they're there and they enforce the law. So it's a little, I don't want to say gray, but the system does not have control of when someone is or is not arrested. We don't have the ability to say, no, you're not going to arrest this person.
So our question and our understanding is that you do measure, or you do indicate when police are called from campus.
So we don't, because we have an officer on campus, we rarely, if ever, call the police because they are there, they are working with our students. They're just not waiting in an office to be called into action. They're very visible. They interact with our students. They're building relationships. So they're a constant value add on our campus.
Can an SRO make an arrest?
Absolutely.
Okay, because they are an employee of the sheriff's department?
Or the
city police
or
department?
the city police in
Okay.
Sebastian.
Okay,
So every student known to have stolen something is arrested once the SRO is involved?
No, there's the enforcement of the code of conduct, and there is things that there's a typical behavior by a student in which we're going to advocate never to have a child arrested. It's just the coming of age thing that everyone in this room has done. And then there's violent acts, or there's a drug, this, that, or the other, in which it will require an arrest.
so, I think it's called CESSR, Cessor. So what does, SE.
ESIR.
Okay, there we go. There we go.
I mean, assessor would be.
What does that measure?
You want to go through the elements of Cessor, if it's okay with everybody? And that is information that is recorded
Okay,
and provided to the state. It includes arrests, it includes major offenses.
Pull it up, while it's being pulled up, there are a number of Cessor violations. Not all of them are reported to law enforcement, not all of them are criminal offenses.
okay.
And part of the reporting element when we have a Cessor violation separate report that gets sent to the state that defines, here are the situations, and there's additional reporting options, one of which was whether or not that was reported to law enforcement. And not all of them. You'll see on this, if you look at the state's report, it'll show here are the assessor violations, and it lists the different behaviors going across here, and a column, one of the columns is reported to law enforcement. It's my own microphone. So with that said, the reported to law enforcement is just our reporting it to law enforcement, and then they are the ones that decide whether it's and there's different reporting, civil citation, arrest. I'd have to look at the exact reports, but not all of those reported to law enforcement result in an arrest. Let me.
Now, is that on the public-facing dashboard, Brian?
We don't have specifically like assessor, like a pool, but the state on their site reports it all. It has a report for it. We can certainly add those elements to our.
If we could provide that information to you, that might better help you understand what the data set looks like.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we'd probably have to review and understand better before we can, so we just sort of wrap our heads around it, and also understanding like what is basically what is within the district's purview and what is not.
So I can read some of them: alcohol use, possession, or sale, aggravated battery, intentional great bodily harm, arson, bullying, burglary, criminal mischief, disruption on campus, major, drug sale, distribution, excluding alcohol, drug use, possession, fighting, level 3, grand theft, harassment, hazing, homicide, kidnapping. There's other major incidences that do not fit within the other definitions: robbery, sexual assault, sexual battery, sexual harassment, sexual offenses other than simple battery, threat, intimidation, tobacco, trespassing, and weapons possession. Those are all the different SESR violations.
I think if we can take just some time to review this on the state's website, it'd be helpful, but it seems like really what we want to focus on for this group is what the district does, have some control over. And so we have, I think, more specific questions as it relates to alternative to school suspension and Aspire. Do you all record, I think we saw in the joint plan that there's basically, like, there has to be multiple disciplinary actions before someone's recommended to Aspire or Altos? And do you all maintain that data as to what the infractions are?
So the alternative to suspension is a behavior, whether it's a continuous disruptive behavior which escalates, that's kind of what you're referring to. I'm doing these little things, I get a warning, I get a detention, the behavior doesn't subside, it rises to a level of the alternative suspension program. It is a student remains enrolled in school, but rather than going home and being unsupervised for 2 days, 3 days, they go through the all-false program, they complete the program, then they return to the home school. set into this program. So the assignments will vary outside of the control of the district. So we should be looking at the actual behavior itself. But you have the progression of behavior, meaning it's continuing to be displayed. And then you also have an aggressive behavior, which would be like a level 3 or 4, whatever we call it, in this system, which is a one-time thing. It could be a major fight. It could be a major disruption. It's the first time you did it, but the code of conduct warrants the alternative suspension or suspension based on that one-time displayed behavior. So there's different pathways to get to the alternative suspension.
Okay, so just to make sure we're clear on the out-of-school suspension, office discipline referrals, ALTOS, and ASPIRE indicators, and using risk ratios, do we just want to read each into the record just so we're clear? For indicator 10, the NAACP proposes that the district shall decrease the risk ratio of 3 for African-American students out of school suspension, +1 each year until the gap is eliminated.
So just to clarify a few things about risk ratio, you don't go to 0 with the risk ratio, you go to 1.
To 1,
Correct.
yes.
I was curious about the number 3, where that arose from. And some of the other ones, the way I looked at it, it was close, not exact, so I would just, I don't know.
I mean, I think a proposal is that we included that in there, honestly, just for guidance, so we could show, and we came up with the numbers by pulling it from the dashboard, and so I think that maybe our math is wrong. It's kind of just figuring out our baseline. So we could take out that 3 and say we agree to
Whatever it currently is.
just 1 ratio, or yeah, and that we'll move it 1 risk ratio point.
The other aspect is I would not use it with ALTOS at all. Risk ratio is not a relevant measure when you're talking about a low N count. And I'll give you a very extreme example and try and keep the mass, because I know I'm verbalizing this, but if a black student and a white student get into a fight and they're both suspended, and that's the only suspensions that occur, and there's way less black students at that school, the risk ratio is going to be enormous because it's a percentage of those students. And so when you're dealing with metrics that have a low N count, like there's low instances of it, risk ratio, it gets corrupted a bit in what its intent is. So I'll give you a case in point. When we look at our out-of-school suspension risk ratio, you're right, it might be about 3.4. I can tell you some of our elementary schools are going to have 13, 15 for a risk ratio. It does not mean that they are disproportionately suspending kids. When you look at the actual count of suspensions, it's 2 or 3. And it just happens that maybe it was, and I'm not discounting, I'm just saying that when you use it as a metric of success, the lower the instance is, the less reliable that measure is capturing what you intend it to be. And with our ALTOS numbers being very low, I would be very, for both parties, I would say you might not want to look at risk ratio. The other thing too is that,
So based on what you're saying, it doesn't seem that percentages would be helpful either, because I think that that's what we were trying to think of when we came up with the risk ratios, just especially like based on past conversations when you have these low populations. So how many, like, what do you think what would you all propose is a more helpful measure? If it's
Come
only
to the
10
table with a
students.
Solution, Dr. McMahon.
Yeah, so risk ratio is a good measure. It's what the state measures for classroom removals for ESE students. That's, several years ago we were cited for that. That's what they measured it off of. It's just that when you look at it for ALTOS, because there's such a low instance of that particular intervention, it's not the best measure for it. And our instance is a very low. I think it's.
Oh, wait, we don't want to assess the intervention, we want to assess the
rate,
behavior.
Right, yeah.
Behavior, yes.
So, and my first year here, when we started to look at it, and it was, the risk ratio was 4 point something.
Yes, it was.
And
Now it's 2.
in my head, I think we needed to start with the writing of the referral. Let's just look at the issuing of referrals and see, is there if child A does something and child B does something, it should result in the same action, regardless of the color of A or B.
Yes.
And that was our initial attention, and we reduced that,
Disparity.
that disparity. Then we began to look at, okay, well, do we have other problems? Is when the behaviors are displayed, which we were confident we were able to make significant progress there, and I go and sit in front of the individual who's issuing the punishment. The punishment should also be the same for A and for B. And we were confident that was good. It was actually our opportunity for improvement was to improve classroom management and structures to make sure that we were being consistent with the issuing of a referral. And if somebody did something, the consequence or the action taken was equivalent for all students. So I think we need to, to me, look at the number of referrals and whatever the most, and then the consequences of those specific referrals in an appropriate way, and looking at, because there is such a high level of white students and black students, what would be that appropriate measure. Now, it would be interesting when we get to the problem-solving part to provide that information around all-toss and out-of-door suspension, and then look at the continuing behavior. So, you can say, like, why do you guys even do all-toss? Everyone who goes to all-toss 1 month later does the same thing that got them to all-toss. That intervention doesn't work. Or suspension, it isn't working. And then what should we do to provide the kid with a deep understanding of what behaviors lead to punishment? That's the dialogue we want to get to after we assess everything. So as I say that, Brian, is there a recommendation, suggestion?
I think we want to measure the same thing. Exactly what you articulated is what we want to measure. We're just trying to figure out how to do it.
So I think the risk ratio with the ODRs, that's what stems. So when to Dr. Moore's point, when we the last big round of this problem solving, we looked at average suspension length by administrator. We're looking, are there certain administrators that are suspending black students longer or more often than white students? Every average is going to be different, but they were really close. We looked at it by school. We looked at it by behavior. And to Dr. Moore's point, the code of conduct is so specific that when they had the behavior in front of them, on average, they were treating the kids the same, whether they were black or white. But when we started looking at it, it wasn't, the issue wasn't where the administrator was administering it, because that was very prescribed. It was in the referrals coming to them.
Correct.
And so like our risk ratio for referrals is, based on the December data, 2.6. So when you're starting off with a disproportionate discipline there, the results of that are also going to be disproportionate. What we don't want is to put such a pressure on the intervention that we're no longer intervening on the behavior, where if we can go to the root cause of the behavior and provide structures in place to where it doesn't result in the ODR to begin with, then the rest of the interventions will take care of itself as well. So risk ratio for ODRs is an appropriate measure because it is a large number, so you don't have to worry about it being adversely pulled one way or the other because of a low end count.
So for ODR risk ratio, what about for Aspire? Would risk ratio be appropriate?
Personally, I would lump Aspire, Altos, and out-of-school, that's the intervention. And
Okay.
so if we reduce the referrals, while maintaining and to Dr. Moore's point, providing that data that shows, average suspension, like that's not if we can get the ODR risk ratio closer to 1, then the administration of it is bound by the code of conduct, and it would follow that those metrics would also be the same.
What would be the best way to measure that?
How do we measure recidivism I don't know, geez, I feel like I'm in trouble. It's not, some people don't like that word. But you want the intervention to work. If Altos did what it was supposed to, the behavior shouldn't be repeated.
Except, going back to what Dr. McMahon said, with white versus black, overtly we got a disproportionate. But you went to the referrals, and I wrote a note to myself, and I think, Dr. Moore, I've said it to you, classroom management. This is the main trigger, and recidivism, it is also a part of that. Because I did a case several years ago where this one kid didn't have a prayer. Because the same group of teachers was constantly writing him up and referring him. We want discipline, we want the process, but as we look at the data and try to define it, disproportionately is kids of color. And if it's, you said black and white fighting, black on black. What are those numbers? It's some things in this. Perception is how the person in the recommendation is looking at the overall circumstances. One of the cases I had, the teacher says he made a big thing out of brushing his hair. He threw a pencil and it made a very loud noise. I mean, these are things that if you dwell and dive into this process, and it also goes to SROs when they get involved. That same mindset is problematic when it comes to kids of color. So the referrals is major, but I go with Adrian is decreasing that number, because if we stay at 2.6, my God, all the little children of color in the district could be going.
Well, I think the meat of the conversation, and I'll go back, I was principal of Miami Edison Senior High School, 97% Haitian. And I had small percent of Haitian students in my previous schools, even though they were inner city or alternative schools. I had to quickly take a crash course on understanding their culture. And as an example, it was disrespectful to look in an adult's eyes. It was disrespectful.
It was disrespectful.
And I quickly learned that. But as teachers came in, we had to create this same crash course. So, hey, listen, if you're gonna look at me in the eyes kind of thing, when I'm talking to you, which could be the norm for that individual's family, the kid's like, well, wait a minute, man, I'm doing what my parents told me to do. That's some of the problem solving on creating a deeper understanding of it. Children's backgrounds to better be in service of them through understanding.
Right.
And that's, as we get into some of the consequences, we can look at the consequences. Altos, alternative suspension, the in-school suspension thing. Maybe there's opportunities to refine that because, every time we send a student, white or black, to it, it doesn't work. And then what is leading to, is it general disruptive behavior? Well, what does that mean? Is it disrespect? And then really problem solving around, is there development or support we can provide to educators to have a deeper understanding of who's sitting in their classrooms? I think this is some of the most powerful data and some of the best problem solving we can do in terms of partnership to allow the district to say, okay, we need development for teachers on this specific area, and we need to refine some of the consequences or behavior modification systems that are deemed as punishment that we can refine and improve the impact of those.
Dawn, I want to
Mr. Brown,
piggyback off of something Dr. Smith said, and what they do. A process that's looked over is if you want to find out the root cause, ask the child. If you're having this much recidivism, there has to be a root cause, and if you're gonna find it, it has to come from the child instead of just steady stacking the deck, putting kids in a process, taking classroom hours away from them, all of this stuff, and it's not working. It's like the cat chasing his tail. And you have, you could go right to the child and say, why is this not working? Just an example, I had a young man spent 69 days out of 120, either suspended or in suspension. And it was because the teacher, this was classroom management, would ask him to read. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, among his peers, and he couldn't read. And the teacher had to know it. So in order, Mr. Seymour, for him to get out of that crisis, what would he do?
Act up.
Act out.
Go to alternative, get suspended. But we had him in the Boys to Men, Dr. Smith, and we had a counselor ask him why. He said, because I'm embarrassed that I can't read. So he would take the punishment rather than the embarrassment in front of, but we took the time to ask him, why is he so easily going back to alternative or being suspended?
So if I could, we did engage in some of that work, and you're absolutely correct. Most of our discipline originates in the classroom. And I think that's the idea, is that when we look at the administration of the discipline once it occurred, there's not that disproportionality to, like, it's not that they're suspending a black kid longer or more often than a white kid for the same behavior. It's that referral's coming to them. It's exactly your point, that it's the origin of the discipline, and that's where the disparity starts. And as a result of that, everything that flows downstream is also disproportionate. And if we can reduce that, if we can, to Dr. Moore's point, have greater awareness in the classroom of creating situations in which, the diverse set of needs are met in that classroom, you're not going to have so much of that behavior acting out, trying to escape it. And so by keeping by creating that metric at the ODR level, everything else from it will flow and reduce as well. The root cause, we talked about upstairs, that root cause when we looked at that discipline and the OSS, the disproportionality, the SPIRE, all of that, the root cause was the ODRs that came to the administrator who is assigning those were disproportionate.
So what does that KPI look like?
As similar to, and I don't know the exact numbers you had, but similar to that, like, we're going to reduce the risk ratio of referrals. Getting to one, and I don't know how, I'll leave this for the attorneys, like what is deemed as a success or not, but to get to a risk ratio exactly one, it's going to be either way, which may be a little bit below, a little bit above, whether it's a protective or not. But I think looking at a risk ratio for ODRs is what's going to decrease the disproportionality of that assignment of discipline.
No, I think about the ODRs, and it goes back to the teacher in the classroom. And as a former principal, I would take a look at, how many are setting them down and why. And I think we can do a better job of helping that teacher, not only with management, but culture. And I know not one of you is making an excuse for somebody doing something wrong. You never have. And I go back to, we talked about there's a first-time fight for a young white male and a young black male. If I know that white male was the aggressor, he's getting more days. And this other guy's just defending himself and in the corner. I got that question all the time. Doc, what if I said, try to get away, but if you can't, I understand. And Mr. Wilson and I used to talk about that all the time. My kid had to take a couple days to defend himself. That's the way it is. But he was not the aggressor. But I think, as Dr. Moore and Brian were saying, it's something about, teaching is hard today. And not every one of our students come and they're not all 100% respectful all the time. So, and again, I know you don't make excuses, just helping a little bit there. when Dr. Moore said that about looking in the eyes, that's the exact same thing Dr. Ron Hudson told me my first year here at Vero Beach Junior High, because I didn't know that. I didn't know that you don't look being disrespectful. I just didn't know it. So I think that it's helping more in the classroom. Again, not blaming you, just helping. And also, you know, bringing in our parents to make sure we have that communication with parents. I always used to say, you know, we'd hear all the time, we don't want you raising our kids. Well, I raised 3, that's enough. I just want them, just send them to school ready to learn and be respectful. We can take it from there, you know? So that's just a whole, you know, effort that I think we can do better on, and it comes from the office referrals. I hated arrest for students, but sometimes if there was a huge campus disruption or drugs, that's the way it was. You know, that's the law. So, but I think we can all work on, you know, why are they being sent up? What can we do to help there?
So, Dr. Moore, it seems that earlier you mentioned that you were looking at disparities in enforcement of, I guess, disciplinary codes. Do you also, like, maybe that's a more effective way, in addition to ODRs, to looking at what we want to measure, which is reducing the disparity in enforcement?
I think it's all of the behaviors. What is
Yes,
the
look at all of
consistency
them.
of behaviors?
Right.
And although we have reduced some of those, we've been a little bit more specific in terms of what those codes actually mean, which allows us to have a deeper understanding of where we need to provide development support or evaluation in terms of what we're doing. Providing all of those and taking a slice at that based on the number is absolutely fine. I just think this is the most, not straightforward, but most meaningful to connect problem solving to, because it's not over, teaching and learning is over the course of time. Changing behaviors, we could be a little bit, we don't have to wait so long to change behaviors, and we can move faster in terms of our learning, in terms of what's working and not working. But providing, you know, these are all the different behaviors, percents, ratios, whatever it is. Ultimately, we want to reduce behaviors that remove students from class.
The other thing I would caution with looking at specific behaviors is while the assessor definitions are defined by the state, the other discipline codes, we do have some. And so we've engaged over the years in some changing of those codes. Like, for example, several years ago, we had drug sales, drug distribution, and drug possession or something. Anyway, we don't ever disaggregate it. It's like, so why would we categorize it that specific if we're never really looking at it? And so a few years ago, we had a huge number of just different violations, and what one person would call a disruption, another one might call disrespect. And so we condensed them, and then we realized we condensed them too much, so we expanded a little bit. And so if you recall upstairs, we were talking about, you know, the difference between FSA and FCAT, and so the state, in their statutory language, instead of naming the test, they just called it state assessments. That way they don't have to constantly change the statutes. And so I do worry about if you name behaviors, if in problem solving we change the codes a little bit to be more specific, or like this year, we had this huge push for cell phone usage. So we have an actual code for cell phones where we didn't necessarily have one in prior years. So I think just that generalized ODR might be, for an overall indicator, a little bit more indicative of an overall disproportionality when it comes to discipline.
You just touched on one, but going back to Mashawn with what would that KPI look like? And you just did with the cell phones. I had a young lady, several of them, who came to me with the code of conduct about their attire, what they were wearing. But they were looking at a white female with the same basic outfit on that was not sent to the office or called out, but because the young black girl's body shape was different, a teacher interpreted as inappropriate, the same two outfits. It went as far as cheerleaders. I had a cheerleader come to me. Oh, that's inappropriate. The same uniform bought from the same place, but on this little black girl, it was inappropriate. And going back with the cell phones, Kevin and I was talking about his children in St. Lucie. It's all right to have a cell phone, but we have weaponized cell phones in River County, and disproportionately, it's probably going to be black kids. So we have to look at how we are doing stuff, and the KPIs, you know, as Jody, Adrian and Michonne were saying, how do we define a KPI that does not bash the teacher per se, but realize that that's the origin of the problem, which leads to this other problem with ALTOS, Aspire, expulsion, and all the other stuff, because the accumulation eventually going to lead to expulsion. How does that KPI look?
Well, and I think you made the exact point. Like, think about all the examples of the two dress code violations of a black and white. That's the origin of the ODR, and that's where we need to target our problem solving, is how the origin of that, how that entry point to the discipline process occurs, and how can we mitigate against that? How can we minimize the disproportionality to the entry of the discipline process? Because once they're into it, you know, think about the black child with the dress code violations getting a violation, where the white child who's wearing the same thing, they didn't even enter the discipline. So you're going to have some kind of result for the black child who had an ODR that, and it will come across as disproportionate. So by focusing on the ODR, I don't know that it necessarily demonizes teachers, but it helps us to create a metric in which we can monitor and work towards it. We can provide culturally relevant discipline practices. We can provide trainings on those things so that the origin, the entry points to that discipline process is
So
disproportionate.
I think that what we're looking for is basically like an output, because I think that we're now on the same page with risk ratio and ODR. The NAACP is concerned about any person who leaves, any student who leaves the classroom to go to alternative programming, even if it ends up being a helpful intervention, if there's disparity in how the program is being applied, if a student is more at risk of being sent to Aspire because they're black, we want to be able to measure that and see that there's a reduction in that disparity. So that's really what we're looking for now. It's just like, if it's grouping together OSS, Aspire, and Altos, we can talk about that. If it's looking at just measuring a decrease in the disparity, we can talk about that. But the NAACP is concerned about students leaving the classroom.
Right, I think it's the reduction of behaviors.
Which behavior?
That gets you removed from the classroom. In the adult's interpretation of that behavior. But you start the problem solving at the frequency in which a behavior is being displayed. And it may be in 9th grade in language arts, this particular teacher is writing X number of referrals, X% for black, X% to white. There's something off there. I just think that's where you look. And I think that's the level of accountability looks at our ability to reduce the frequency of those behaviors. The interventions is to me is another conversation where it's problem solving. Like, this intervention does not work, or this intervention is being overused for black students in comparison to white students. That's problem solving, where we can say, yeah. But the accountability to me, comes in at rubber meets the road in the reduction of behaviors that get kids removed from class. And then the problem solving or the dialogue we engage in, well, let's talk about doing something different, or we're overusing this or underusing that. You know, it's accountability and then problem solving on the interventions that are in place. And then to be honest with you, I think, you know, if I could, I think our effort needs to go in front of the behavior and evaluate what we're doing before the behavior is displayed, so it's never displayed, versus evaluating the intervention for the behavior. We're on the wrong side of the behavior. We want to be on the front side of it, not on the back side of it.
So how would you propose that as a KPI? That's what I'm trying to.
I would
Reducing the
email
risk
Dr.
ratio of
McMahon and
ODRs.
say, what?
It's,
Go ahead.
I was just saying the risk ratio of ODRs, because that's what reduces the disproportionality to the entrance to the discipline world.
Do you need an ODR before you get sent to Aspire?
Yes.
or-
That is a first
Okay,
step.
then
So
I think
when a student misbehaves, they are given an ODR, an office discipline referral.
But
That's,
don't you think, Brian, it's that, yes, but if we're really gonna problem solve, it's also looking at the behavior that led to it. So here's the ODR, that's accountability, but here's the things or the behavior that led to it. You had 100 classroom removals for disrespect or however we categorize them, so we can really drill down to what do we do on the front side to, you know, it's, the only way to reduce ODRs is to address the behavior that's leading to an ODR. That's what we gotta get to.
And I just want to say, as coming from a mental health perspective, that behavior, for some kids, or for some students, I don't like to say kids, if that teacher, going back what Dr. Morris stated earlier, does not have that cultural experience, or even if they have it, but they're not willing to adhere to that cultural discipline, and I know that would take a lot, but that's where that professional development skill sets come in. No, they may not have a lot of time, but it's almost like instructors really have to kind of be counselor/teacher, because the symptom, you're just putting a Band-Aid. The root, now you're getting to why the student is doing what they do, not justifying their behavior, because yes, it starts at home, but Denise may be home alone taking care of her family member, and now she's coming to school, and now I'm acting out because I didn't get sleep, so now I can't get my work done, I'm sleepy, and now the teacher is constantly, I'm getting these ODRs. Now I'm sent to Aspire, and now Aspire is recognizing, but if we don't, it's gonna continue if you have people that are not willing to be passionate enough to get to the root. And again, it takes time. We're gonna keep having these, because let's be honest, we have people in here, we all have prejudices, and it's not just black and white prejudices, it's different types, it's biases, it's stereotypes, so there's a lot. But if you really want to help that child out, we all know that hunger, when you're sleepy, you're irritated, you're frustrated. It's the environment in which some of these children live in, and there's an automatic, when you have a black student already feeling that they're not welcomed in that particular teacher's classroom. So then there's another layer. And again, if you go back and address the students, and I know we have student government, but really sit down with them and say, hey, what do you propose that would alleviate, and having a come together? I don't know.
Well, if you've been reading the news, I read too much news.
It's hard.
There's a kid in Texas who has been suspended, I don't know, 2 or 3
His
months
hair.
now because of his hair.
Yes.
Because he has braids.
Unbelievable.
So what behavior does the little cheerleader do to cause herself to have an ODR when she's wearing the same uniform that the other cheerleader is wearing? What behavior does another kid do if 2 of them are fighting and one gets the bigger suspension? Now, if he starts it, I can understand that. And let me start out by, I can't stand disrespect. And when I was at Vero Beach High School, somebody cussed at my teacher. First instance was 6 days. And the parent says, oh, he only said the B word. And I said, well, he can say the B word all day long at your house. My teachers do not deserve to be called that while they're working.
Right.
I can't stand disrespect at all. So I'm not anti-discipline. But we did, when we were doing the equity meetings, we were asking for a procedure or something to look at where the ODRs were coming from. Which school has the most, which teacher has the most, and I felt like running into roadblocks because, oh, well, there's this asterisk and 10 and you can't do this. Well, still, that does not prevent. So if that teacher is hidden behind those roadblocks, you will never get to the root of the problem. And I have been told sometimes when I walk out of here, believe it or not, I have quite a few friends still in the district. A lot of people I just love to death to hear. But they'll say, well, my kid, who's white, is in the school and their friend in the class is black, and they can do the same thing, but the black kid will get kicked out. But they're afraid to come and say that. So it's those kind of instances that I think looking at the ODRs and finding out, is there a disproportionate disciplinary action taken, and that would help out, because everybody can have something mental going on, but the teacher, like a police officer, is here to serve and protect. And when that person is being identified just because of their hair or just because of something they did the same as another child, that's a problem. So, question, has there been a study to see where the ODRs come from, mostly by school, and which teachers are doing it, and have those teachers have they been addressed? Because to me, it's a problem if you have, what percentage is it? 70% in alternative school, black students? Is that correct? 70 or
Close.
above?
It was 69 the last time.
Oh, when I saw it, it was 70.
Oh, we went up a percent?
Yeah,
I'm not
70-something. And if it was mostly black males, now if you do something if you're just going to bully somebody or beat up somebody, I understand it. I believe that kids have a right to come and learn. Nobody has a right to disrupt that learning environment. And if you don't want to be in school, somewhere else is for you. But if you have something that you can get rid of, such as the ODRs, and there's I listen to some of my kids' friends talk, and I'm like, where did they get this from? Oh, this teacher just targets the black kids, or this one just does this or does that. It's not in their imagination. Sometimes those things happen. There's a bad apple in everywhere you go, but sometimes, so I think that's one thing that we have to take a look at, since we're talking about the ODRs, is somewhere, who are the most coming from? And occasionally there's a teacher that will send me a message or give me a call and say, my school is just sending these black kids to the alternative like crazy. And you know me, I would give you the name of the school and everything if I felt like something was going to be done about it. But that type of thing does happen. So I didn't want to have things sugar-coated, but that's what needs to be done. There are some people who not everybody loves kids. They just don't like kids. And statistics show that the #1 student being put out of the class is a black male. And second is black females for dress code or hair or something like that.
So, a lot of questions. So we do have the data available. We go through a data review once a month at Extended Cabinet, where we have the opportunity to look at different data sets, and we drill down to the parent letter sent to the teacher for the number of absences. We have trained all schools to do the exact same procedure or process to problem solve around the frequency of referrals. And quite honestly, there's a lot of things that have led to the academic improvement, the academic outcome improvements. One of it is just drastically increasing the amount of time kids are in class. So there's a high level of accountability in terms of the interventions as well as the behaviors that are being displayed. So it's the conversation is taking place based on the frequency of a teacher who's writing a referral, just not referrals for black and white students, but all students.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, you know, some of that drive is you're accountable as assistant principal to be an instructional leader. And we got to help you understand, you've got to help teachers have meaningful procedures in class, so they're just not pushing kids out of class. So we have that, and that's relatively easy to share and great problem solving to engage in. Dr. Shafi just pulled up, IR prep is actually 48.6% black and 36 point something white. Now, if we're going to talk IR prep, the enrollment has drastically increased over the years because the code of conduct is, been revised, and the progression of discipline is a little bit more quick, for lack of a better way of saying it. And there's 72 kids, which typically, I think that was probably pretty normal before I got here, but keep in mind when I got here, it was down to 26 kids because of the pandemic, and they weren't in school. They couldn't display behaviors to be assigned to that center. So we have it. We can obviously provide that data. Dress code to me is just to say it, it's I don't understand why we don't have a more comprehensive dress code. I come from a system where every public school, a high school, 49 of them, all had a dress code. Every single one. Uniforms. And it eliminated that conversation, and it eliminated that judgment. The judgment from an adult to misinterpret something or just wouldn't happen because it was going to be the polo shirt and the shorts that came to here. We need to do a better job in the enforcement on dress code. Now, it is better than it was last year, but there is still significant work. And I know that this is Vero Beach, but in the classroom, we're not at the beach. So maybe because I'm a girl dad, but there's significant work to do on the enforcement of dress code. And I'm not saying, wherever the camera is, that we need a uniform, because the code of conduct is relatively straightforward on what can and can't be worn. It's just a matter of enforcing it. So.
And the interpretation, and you said something earlier, Doc, it's a twofold. It's the front end and then the back end. The back end is ALTOS and Aspire. The front end is accountability and referrals. And when you don't have an understanding, as Dr. Jones brought up, of culture, if you don't have any empathy, you understand, Dr. Smith brought it up. Kevin brought it up. You have to look at things holistically and not through a silo. And we have a tendency, and one of the things, Doc, you was talking about the causes of it. If a child is in Dr. Jones' class and know from her act that he's not welcome, that she really don't care about him, what you gonna get from that child?
None.
Perfect example, I had an incident when I was working with Alternative. And this young kid, Dr. Smith can better do it. He was in Alternative, and they had to do the modules. And this kid did about 4 modules in about 2.5 weeks. We said, they say you this, you dumb, you all of this. And we say, what's going on here? He said, well, I was sick, and I had to during lunch, I laid my head on my desk, and the teacher couldn't leave, had to stay there with me. The teacher thought he was asleep. Her friend came in, girl, why you not in the cafeteria, blah, blah. Oh, I gotta worry about him. He dumb, he ain't gonna never do nothing. It's a waste of time. This kid is hearing this. He told us, he thought, he's a child, remember, he was getting even by being what she said he was. These are the things that these children don't talk about. And once they don't feel welcome, it's not how much you know, it's how much you care. And not to boost Dr. Jones up because she did it, she would walk the campus at Sebastian and let those children know. I can give Mr. Seymour credit. I've seen him at Oslo and Vero walk the campus and let those kids know he's approachable. He's not this big bully that the only time they're gonna see him is when he gonna drop the hammer and kick him out of school. So I think it's a two-pronged, but I go back to where Adrian has to go, is as we do these KPIs, we got to do it on the front end, which being that it's twofold, and we got to also do it on the back end.
Yes, and while I enjoy the stories, guys, I think we have less than a little over an hour to get through some KPIs.
I could, just a second. Are you all right?
That's why I went back to the KPIs.
So I think, like, we are on the same page for the ODR, and now we're talking about the, just so we're clear, what is being reported as the disciplinary infractions that lead to the ODR? That's where I'm still kind of hazy on what that reporting or KPI would look like. Would we just measure, I mean, because like how I'm hearing things, if you can't really measure someone who's violating a code of conduct, but it's not reported. So that's why we look at risk ratio, because we're looking at you're more likely to be reported because we're just looking at the outcomes. So that's where I'm still sort of hazy on how we measure this infraction piece.
Right, yeah.
And when you say infraction, you're talking about the actual administration of the consequence, like Aspire Altos?
No, like-
The step prior that
Like
Dr.
if
Moore
it's
was talking about.
stealing
You looked
or
about
disruption, the behavior.
just looking at, like, I guess, if we're measuring the risk ratio for ODRs, but you were also measuring, like, the likelihood that it was happening by a teacher, school, like, or
Yeah.
the
So
type of infraction, how we measure that and what a KPI would be.
I think the premise that we need to go by is black students do not act out more so than white kids. Like, kids are kids. Whether they're black or white, the behaviors are relatively the same. The ODR is a measure of when they break that behavioral framework that we expect. And I think what we're saying is, in listening to the stories, the same thing with the hair locks, the dress code, it's the adults who are making that decision that this behavior for this black child is outside of the behavioral framework, but I'm going to excuse the same behavior on the white child. The threshold for that is that ODR. In problem solving is where Dr. Moore is going. It's like, okay, so if we know that that is disproportionate, the ODRs, how do we reduce that? We reduce that through culturally relevant practices, all those things, evaluating it by teacher. Are there pockets? Is it a school? Is it a grade level? Is it location? Is it a classroom? And that work is the problem solving, but the way we know that the problem solving is effective is when the ODR risk ratio is reducing closer to 1.
So, based on that, you would say that it would only be one KPI? It would
Well,
only be
to me,
ODR.
as there's two things, that's the metrics.
Okay.
And is it working? Is it going up or is it going down? So maybe that's the metrics, but I think maybe there's another opportunity also to report back or to identify what are we doing with what's the interventions that we're putting in place to improve the numbers to go down. I think that's that's part of the conversation where we really can kind of gel it in partnership. And, it's, is the number going up or down? And it will fluctuate, but also report back the system interventions that are in place. I don't know what that would look like, and that's very different than what we have been doing, but I think that's, and maybe that's after you go through the evaluation, you engage in what is the problem solving. I mean, I do think it is the one metrics, but in response to that metrics, what is being done in order to provide services to teachers, to administrators, and students. I think that's.
Does it have to be quantifiable?
Right.
Like, could it be like a provisioning of the action steps in response, or are you looking for a numerical?
I think what we're really looking for is just that the district is reducing the disparity in discipline, and I think that that's calculated by this ODR risk ratio. But from the numbers that we pulled, even though it's a small sample, Black students are more likely to go to Aspire and Altos than white students. So we do want to see that likelihood diminish, and we represented that as a risk ratio. But I'm hearing from Dr. McMahon, because the sample size is so small, that maybe risk ratio is not the best way to report it. So I don't know if it's so small that we can literally do numbers, like.
Yeah, but keep in mind, that might be a decision a parent made, I mean, I have no one else to white parent, I can take 2 days off work, no issues, and discipline my kid and make him do this, that, or the other because he's on suspension. Black student, no, I absolutely have to go to go to work. I have to choose that intervention. There may be other factors that play into the assignment of ALTOS, because that is a choice.
And I think that's why we proposed it as a ratio because ideally in a bigger sample size, you have enough white students where like the parents are making the same decisions, and Black students where the parents are making the same decision. But in a sample size so small, I understand that one parent could really sway the ratio. So
the big glaring problem is why is it not being selected more? That's, it should be, yes, parent, yes, send my kid to get services and support, not to, I mean, families are making the easy pick, just go home for 2 days or 3 days. That's where we need to problem solve.
I think we're saying the same thing, but struggling with how we measure it. It's not the count of students in the intervention, it's the application of the intervention equitably.
Exactly, just how you measure that.
I think I would push back on that just a little bit, in the sense that what we have seen is that when looking at the behaviors through an ODR, it is equitable.
Say that again, buddy.
The statement you just made, Dr. Shafty, is that we're looking at the equitable administration of those interventions. And what I would argue is that it is equitable considering the ODRs that are being sent to the administrator. They are, if I'm an AP and I've got 10 referrals in front of me, I am administering ALTOS, OSS, all those things equitable, whether you're Black or white, it's the same. The problem is that I have 7 referrals for Black students and 3 for white.
The origination
Okay,
of the
so
ODR.
maybe that's
It's a
why,
reduction of ODRs
then
for Black
that's,
students.
exactly, that's what we need to just make sure that we're measuring, that application's equitable, because I understand like the meat of it is with the ODR.
Right.
What
So
we
if
wanna
we can
make sure
provide that
is
data?
that, right, it's just making sure that that stays equitable, that you see, I have an infraction for having, bringing pot to school, and I'm sending you to this, or bringing I honestly don't even know what.
Like you never got a
infraction is.
referral in school, come on.
I'm just so well behaved. But or skipping class, that you see a you as an assistant principal sees a Black student skipping class and a white student skipping class, and you then take the next step equitably. That's really what we want to measure.
So that's the ODR. So like,
Yeah,
you're
so-
absolutely right.
Well,
When you
that's-
see two
you want
students, a
both.
black
You
student, and a
I
white
want
student
both.
skipping.
The next application, that
Yes.
if it gets if there's some escalation or other assignment or even recommendation, like even if, and so what Dr. Moore is saying is, it's a parent choice, then we would even say that, like, we've referred you to Aspire, and you as a parent have the choice. We just want to see like the referrals to Aspire being applied equitably.
So it
So-
would be, I'm sorry, Brian.
That's okay.
Two things.
you're
First,
boss.
the ratio of ODRs that being written.
Right.
And then, the assessment or evaluation of the consequences broken down by race.
Yes.
So if we provided that data and show, because we've done it before, and we can show that, for black and white students who are written up for disruption, disruption might not be the best because it's a huge category, but for those discipline codes, let's just say fighting, we can show the average length of each intervention is really close. In fact, with out-of-school suspension, it's longer for white kids than it is for black kids. If we show that, then it's kind of proof of what we've problem solved, that there is not a disproportionality in the administration of it. Like, that part is good.
Yeah, I think that it would be, a KPI would just say that the district maintains an equitable application of the ODR.
We would be able to show that with that data.
Yes.
So the KPI would be more of an like an acknowledgement or an affirmation statement, and then when we get to the measure, you can tell us exactly how you want it provided.
Right. We would see that data that you just described.
And the reduction of the ODR still takes some time on that front end.
Yes.
I
Is that-
mean, like Ms. Smith, Dr. Smith was saying, and making sure, you can look at, you hear this all the time, 10% of the kids will cause 90% of the referrals, or 10% of your teachers may cause 90% of the referrals, you know what I mean? So as a principal, you can look at that, saying, this is coming quite a bit, I've got to work on this, but it's that front end of, seeing why this is happening. And that takes a lot of work, with teachers, or the ones who there's some that you never see a referral from, ever. And
So-
it takes some work.
The district's application of the student code of conduct will be applied.
I think the district will equitably apply by race the code of conduct.
Administration.
The
of
administration of the code of
interventions.
conduct.
Right.
What, can you repeat that?
The administration of interventions.
The district shall equitably apply the administration of interventions.
Or violations of the code of conduct.
But again, if you've got that one kid who's up there for the fifth fight versus, there just has to be some caveat. I got to tell a story, Mershawn. I'm sorry, I have to. It is a great one.
Oh, no.
No, really. All right, go to 1985, my first year as dean. I'm really excited at the high school and so forth. And I run into this assembly. Venda Burgess, Alma Russ, Valerie Brand, all of a sudden, they said, you have to leave. I said, what do you mean I have to leave? I said, you have to leave. These ladies and gentlemen at Vero Beach High School met with all of the black students at Vero Beach High School. And I just listened in a little bit, just talking to them. They were true mentors. They were true guidance counselors. They were true teachers, making sure that, they wanted them to be successful. And I think that's the front end kind of stuff. And Venda came out later and apologized, but I'm telling you, it worked. I'm telling you. So, just having our community, our parents, our NAACP, anyone, talking with our children about expectations and seeing people that look like them, seeing people that care about them. And it was a positive reinforcement of positive behavior, except they kicked me out. I was okay. You know him, I still talk to those.
Yeah.
And while we're here, I see that the codes and definitions for SESIR, but I'm unable to find on the FDOE website the data reporting.
I can send you a link if you
Okay,
were
great.
looking. It is on there.
Okay,
Unfortunately,
perfect.
DOE's website is not always most user-friendly. And I will say the latest data that they have displayed is 21-22. 22-23 should be released soon. They base it off of what's called Survey 5, which the reporting window goes all the way through October 31st. So they should have on their site 22-23.
Okay.
I'll send you a link right now. Actually, I think I actually sent you the Excel.
Oh, well, I'm on it, I moved away. Okay, so for, so I think from this, as it relates to discipline, we're going to look at this SESIR. I think a lot of it. Sessor. We'll look at Sessor. I think a lot of it will just be data monitoring on our part because of the nature of the relationship between police department, sheriff's office, and the district. But the two indicators that we have for this section is one related to the ODR risk ratio. The district shall decrease the office discipline referrals risk ratio of 2 until the gap is eliminated. Would that be right?
It's a Brian question.
It would go from 2 to 1.
Risk ratio of 1 is
Mhm.
even.
I think it's currently.
Thereabout.
2.6, you said, right?
It was
2.6 is what I put, based off the public-facing dashboard for December, it was at 2.6.
So when you say risk ratio of 2,
Is that,
Should be of 2.6.
okay,
why don't we just say reduce it until,
reduce the risk ratio until it's eliminated. I mean, I think before, we've done it 1 risk ratio point each year for other indicators, but this would only be reducing it by 1, so,
And I want to maybe clarify, just so that
Okay.
we're all on the same page, when it comes to risk ratios, you're not going to see, it's very difficult to reduce a risk ratio midstream. And so the way that the fraction works is you have 2 fractions. You have the top of it, the number of ODRs for black students divided by the number of black students. That gives you the percentage. So let's say there's 10% of black students get an ODR. It's not that high, but just for even numbers, I'm saying that. And then we're dividing it by white student ODRs divided by the total white students. And let's say 5% of white students get an ODR. The overall risk ratio is 10 divided by 5 is 2. But once you have black ODRs, I can't un-ODR a kid. I can't take that referral away. So when you're talking about a risk ratio, if I have 1,000 ODRs across 10,000 students, I can't eliminate that in a year. So really the only way to reduce a risk ratio this year is to increase the bottom numbers, writing up white kids more.
I think we
So,
would be comparing years.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure that we're at 2.6 now, the end of this year,
we're at 2.6 as of when, Dr.?
as of December for year to date. Come in January, the only way that that would be lower is if we just basically wrote up a whole bunch more white students. So,
Dr. McMahon, why it's part of our strategic plan, so could we use last year's outcome, which of 2.31, and then the target for 2024 is 2.0? Or however,
Why don't we do year over, that's maybe what we're missing is year over year.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right. I
we just
didn't
need
mean
to
to confuse
collect
it. I
the
just wanna
data
make sure that we
because because of the shifts in the code of conduct, I think the outcomes are gonna be, I hate to say, put a little asterisk on it, but because the code of conduct is different. The frequency or the issuing of referrals is more than it was in previous years. So this really provide the data, but at the end of this year in comparison to the end of next year is gonna give us a better gauge as to what is and isn't working, because the frequency of what we're doing remains the same.
And we have baseline back to 1920. So
Yeah, I saw that.
it's nice to have the trends over time.
What happens if we don't meet that criteria? Hello?
I don't know. I mean, it really, it's, because it's really, what happens if you don't meet it, I think it's really a decision
If
of
you look at all of the,
Judge Williams. It's sort of ultimately in the discretion of Judge Williams.
let's say, okay, all right.
If- Just an open conversation coming from me and NAACP. If due diligence, see, in this process, it's fluid.
Yes.
And if we don't all realize that, we might well get up from the table and leave. We are holding you with KPIs to a standard, but if your efforts show that you are working to that, what can I say? But if you just gonna feed me a lot of noise and the pendulum is not moving, then we have a problem. But if that risk ratio gets, now it's 2.6, and like Dr. McMahon say, can't do it midstream, Dr. Moore said, let's do some more data, and then let's reassess it. If it drops to 2.15 or something, that's movement. Not that it satisfies what we want, but that's movement. We'd like to be at 1.5, but the movement, what we have to see.
And I don't mean to, be rude or anything by saying that, but it's, ultimately just, I think we would be hard pressed to say, oh, they're not making, they've reduced 2.6 to 1.7, and that's not good enough, and I don't think, you've made enough progress, therefore, you have to maintain jurisdiction over the settlement agreement. We would be hard pressed to make arguments like that. But in the context of all of the other indicators, in the context of all the indicators, we don't know, like that, and ultimately, we could all agree on something. We could all agree on something, and Judge Williams is not impressed by it. Judge Williams doesn't want to enter the
It was
agreement.
4 point something, what, a year or two?
I was 4 point something when I got here.
Okay.
Baseline 1920 was 4.0. Last year, we ended 2.31, and then the goal at the end of this academic year is 2.0. Knowing that there are going to be
I got some work to do.
monthly fluctuations,
She was, yeah.
it's nice to have it as outcome data at the same time of year, because more than likely our other measures
we're
will
not
be
gonna hit it.
provided as annual outcome measures too over time,
We're not gonna hit it this year.
not with cell phones.
With cell phones,
Cell
there's no,
phones.
yeah.
The cell phones have added, district-wide, we have about 3,000 ODRs that are district-wide. Risk ratio is just under 2
Hey, Doc, it's Jeff.
for cell phones.
But we can look at the data, taking those out and seeing if that's meaningful, right?
The cell phone was added after the whole Confederate flag, and some students recorded the incident. It was before you came.
It was when I was here in 17, 18 for
Yeah,
executive
17,
director.
18, and that's when it,
Oh, I mean, I don't know what was in the code of conduct. What we've shifted this year was a zero tolerance in terms of middle schools. They can't be out. Same thing in the secondary schools. And the consequences themselves went from non-existent to very prescriptive. So the progression of the consequences is what's been drastically added, and the enforcement of it, whereas before it wasn't as specifically clear.
My question also, piggybacking, why? Why is this become such a major thing when other school districts is not?
Cell phones, Coach?
Yeah. Why is it been weaponized, criminalized to the degree that it has been in our district?
I think in a way it's teaching them an appropriate use. I mean, like, as adults, we go to our cell phone, we have something, but we understand that. I think with kids, they're so addicted to it that, you know, I think a genius policy of, at least for my own kids, they can be on it in between classes. They can check their messages. It gives them an appropriate, I'm going to say professional, I don't know if that's the right word, but this is an appropriate use of cell phones. And you talked to teachers before, they were frustrated because they're trying to teach and kids are, you know, back there and they would say there's no teeth, there's no, I need them to pay attention, I want them to learn, but they're disengaged in their phones. And so what it does is it gives them a framework that this is an appropriate way of behaving. And yes, initially we've got a lot of referrals, but I can tell you my kids at the very beginning of the year, if there weren't these referrals, they'd be like, oh, you know, yeah, they won't do anything about it. There's a repercussion for it.
I hear your perspective, but what I hear is the fact that a lot of inside information relative to things going on in the district was getting out via cell phone videos.
No.
And I know, and there were several incidents that school cameras did not catch, that people gave me videos that caught where some kids were accused of stuff that they didn't do when the other videos showed up. So it's all about perception.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I 100%, I would not argue with that statement. The only thing I would just say is that you're right, there might be some instances caught on cell phones that aren't on school cameras, but then you look at the flip side, how many more behaviors were originated because of all the cell phone
terrible.
behaviors?
Yeah.
And is that a
Kids were
much
sending it out,
larger number?
I'm just saying, there's different perspectives out on the horizon as to the why. And Dr. Smith brought it up previously. And you just, how many more ODRs have occurred as a result of cell phones?
A lot.
And then I would say, then break it down,
We can do that.
you know.
But Coach, also talking to the administrators, they said it was tough at the beginning, it's getting a lot better. I don't know if ODRs are showing that, but I'm gonna tell you, when cell phones came in I think it was 2007 or 8, right before I left, and we're talking to Billy Wilson about that. This will be tough, and it's been tough. When the state allowed them,
Yeah.
the state.
Billy came to me. He said, man, I'm the bad guy with these cell phones. He said, Coach, could you help me out? And I was the one, hey man, why are you gonna put Mr. Wilson on Front Street like that? Put that cell phone up. There are different ways to do it, and Billy didn't want to drop the hammer, but he wanted the message, man, put that phone up, don't use that phone in that teacher's classroom, and it worked. But right now, it's scary that how weaponized that cell phone ODR has become.
So one other perspective, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say too. In our department, safety and security, we deal with a lot of other issues, and like Dr. Mann stated, there are so many other concerns as a result of one video. A lot of these videos travel between a number of cell phones, of whom people we don't know. And a lot of those individuals may be adults, and we don't know whom else might be involved in those videos. One other factor is that students are very sharp, very smart. They know when to capture what they need to get their point across. You never see who's on the back of the camera and what actually constituted a concern by the school. A lot of these things have to be viewed from its totality in order to determine what the primary cause was. But the problem is that people see the video and then they jump on that bandwagon based on how it was created. We've got kids that have edited a lot of the videos that the community might see. And also, when you see a video, it might be another 5 videos relating to that same instance that will tell a different story. So it's not just, black and white how we see the videos, but it's what's all involved in us determining what causes that to happen.
Oh, I concur. It's just that My concern is the weaponization
Didn't the state put something
of
out
the
about
cell
this
phone
year,
and
social media?
relative to African Americans receiving ODRs and for cell phones. When you stated there's bigger issues out there. We have some serious issues going on in discipline and all other factors. And now we shifting a population into what we are disproportionate. You know what I'm saying? So it's a conversation to be had.
Yeah. And I hope it will get better, but
Just the increase in instructional time,
trying,
drastic.
Hopefully.
yes.
All right, Merry Christmas, everybody. Enjoy.
Are we?
I think, I think we have some just little points that we have to exchange back and forth.
We'll work on the indicators based on the components of school grade by content to separate out, like, to make sure it captures what is measured by an EOC versus what's measured with ELA and math and social studies.
And we had another indicator from, that we talked about a lot last time with APs, and then we ultimately came to the conclusion that we just wanted to break down all other instruction. So I think we just want to also break that down, so we're capturing
All the assessments.
dual enrollment, all of the other types of assessments.
Through acceleration.
Yes, everything, all the
All of
components.
that.
Yes,
Okay.
everything. And then we just need to get back to you on what an indicator, if any, for SES, assessor looks like. But I just sent over Matt the draft of our equitable application of the code of conduct. And then I think the other indicator is the ODR,
ODRs, yes.
which we're in agreement
That's a
on,
key one,
but that we would, and I can also send that back over, we would just say that it would, the risk ratio would decrease until we get to 1, decrease each year until we get to 1,
Year over year.
year over year. Mhm.
We can work on that, but that's the
Yes.
understanding, yeah.
Yes. So I think we are on the same page with section 6, and we just have to get those nits ironed out for what will be our final list of KPIs.
So when's the report to the court due?
January.
Doc, that's what I was gonna
Okay.
get to next, if it's all right. So, I know the district will be taking some semblance of a winter break at some point.
Hard stop.
Hard stop,
Yeah, 2
okay.
weeks.
When is that, so when is the last day that Dr. Shafty will be in the office? I guess is the most important question I could ask.
I'll have my stuff with me.
She want to get off
I know,
Monday.
but I will.
No,
have
after
my
after the
stuff.
20th, she will not be working.
Perfect.
After the 20th.
So, and then the attorneys from Baker McKenzie have a trial starting in January. So I think what we'd like to do is wrap up these issues by December 20. We can continue to work, the attorneys can continue to work on the joint report that, based on prior conversations, is going to look a lot like the one we did in July. It'll just have the same information that was in the July report expanded to the work that's been done since July. That's due in the middle of January, but I think the attorneys would like to get that done by the end of the year so that the Baker McKenzie folk can focus on their trial. And then I will make it my responsibility to make sure it's filed in the middle of January. And hey, you know what, we'll file it early, if we can. And so we're gonna have to finalize the proposed dates that we wanna give the court for the in-person hearing, but we can have that conversation in the next, week.
Yes, I think we would propose dates we can indicate as well, in case Judge Williams was contemplating that we met in January, that our trial is scheduled to end on February 4th. So we'll let her know that we have a pre-existing conflict with the court, or with the Palm Beach County Court, and proposed dates in February and March.
And I've got 3, I'll email you
Okay.
when we're done here, and you can look at them with your folks, and if those three work for you guys, then we can, you know, provide all three to the court.
Okay. Okay,
Is that everything we need to do between now and January 19?
And December 20th, but yes.
Yeah, we'll get it done by December 20, but there's nothing else that we need to worry about.
okay then,
All right.
3:51.
Concludes.
Thank you,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Much
thank you.
accomplished.
Yeah, thank